This Zoom event is on occasion of our exhibition with Tony Marsh and Sarah Amos, opening November 7th. Both artists are pioneers and innovators in their respective practices, Sarah with printmaking, Tony Marsh in pushing the limits of clay. I'd like to invite those of you who are in the Bay Area to visit the gallery, see the exhibition. It's extraordinary. We have a booking app on the website where you can make an appointment or email or call the gallery. The website also has views of the installation as well as works in the exhibition. Any further information, just contact the gallery. I hope everyone will also join us for our November Zoom event with Sarah Amos and Julia Cousins. The date will be announced very soon. This conversation will be approximately 45 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A. Let me provide a very brief introduction to Nancy Lim and Tony Marsh. Nancy Lim, and thank you, Nancy, very much for doing this, is a curator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. She previously worked at the Guggenheim Museum and the Museum of Modern Art, New York. Current exhibitions include Patty Chang with Sarah on view through November 6th at Cushion Works and Friends Indeed Gallery. Upcoming projects include a book on Deborah Remington and an exhibition with Harry Dodge and Alicia McCarthy at the San Francisco Arts Commission Galleries. Tony Marsh has contributed to the practice of contemporary ceramics as an artist, educator, and innovator for over 40 years. He was named a United States Artist Fellow, an honor awarded to outstanding contributors in American arts and letters. Tony is a professor at California State University, in Long Beach, where he chaired the ceramics department for 25 years. He's also the founding director of the Center for Contemporary Ceramics, a national and international residency program on the campus of CSULB. He's been a visiting artist and lecturer at over 60 institutions, including the Chicago Art Institute, Kansas City Art Institute, UCLA, Parsons School of Design, Alfred University, and Seoul National University. His ceramic sculpture is included in over 30 permanent collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Museum of Arts and Designs in New York, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Oakland Museum of California, the Gardner Museum in Toronto, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, San Jose Museum of Art, ASU Art Museum in Tempe, and the Foshan Museum of Contemporary Art in China. Work from Marsh's Crucible series, recently acquired by the Crocker Art Museum, can be seen in the exhibition Cool Clay through December 31st of this year. My sincere thanks to Tony and Nancy for agreeing to this conversation. And now, Nancy, I'm excited to turn this over to you.
Hi, Patricia, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I thought we would start by talking about some of the works that are on view at the gallery before we go into Tony's larger practice and also talk about the CCC. So diving in, you've described your works as arguments, whether it's arguments with an aspect of the field or with materials or even with larger planetary physical forces. I'm wondering if you can talk about what arguments you're engaging with here in this series.
Just arguments I can win, right? That's the, well, first of all, I want to thank Patricia and I want to thank you too. I've been really excited about this. We've been planning this for a long time and it's been pushed off a couple times, but here we are. And I'm just looking at the list of the attendees and I see a lot of old friends and some new friends and people I really respect and admire. So very pleased to be here and you know, thank you, Patricia, for setting this up. You know, it's something I became aware of probably 10 years ago that I would just be irritated by things, you know, and I feel like the more kind of interesting arguments, it's a way to put it, you know, it's at least a discussion, you know, maybe an argument. have to do with the history of how things are made and with clay and some of the kind of the natural forces at work. You know, like there's an argument going on in this work, in this exhibition, but I think I became really aware of that when I was making, you know, things that I would perforate. And I just perforated incessantly over a long period of time to kind of understand it and to continue to evolve that practice and you know, make advances and improvements in it until I no longer could, and then I stopped. You know, but the argument there had to do with the basic nature of clay and the fact that clay is opaque and dense, and gravity prone, and you know, and so I kind of wanted to be a contrarian relative to all those things, and I wanted to make it ethereal. I wanted to dematerialize it. And so to perforate, really for me, wasn't a decorative device. It was about trying to remove as much material as I could and still leave the essence of a shape. And so I would, you know, drill the holes one at a time and try to keep them as close together without collapsing the form. And just, it was kind of addition by subtraction. The more material I removed, the more intense they became for me and the more ethereal. And, you know, I think one of the things I really enjoyed about it was I could walk to the kiln and carry something and I could look right through it, you know, and find my way to the kiln. That was a little game I played. And so it was really just about the idea that you had to work with a material that was, you know, dense, impervious, visually impervious, and gravity prone, and all these things, and cutting against that thought. It didn't sit well with me, but I had to deal, you know, I had to work that way. And then, you know, the piece next to it in this image is, you know, there's other pieces too, but it has to do with, you know, actually the argument here with that piece in particular might be the fact that you're supposed to make shapes out of clay and then put a liquid coat on top of that to kind of finish them. And really underneath that amalgamation there on the piece on the left, there's just a very, very regular kind of archetypal cylindrical shape. And then the rest of the kind of the formation, that landscape formation there, is all glaze. And so I felt like I was really bringing them to life by shaping them with glaze in a fairly idiosyncratic way, with multiple layers of lots of different materials, and just kind of flipping the notion that you have to shape with clay and finish with glaze on its head a little bit. I was shaping with glaze and, to a large degree. So it kind of goes like that. I think those are very, in every case, you know, and there's other arguments too, but in every case, there are arguments I want to win, and they are little tiny whispers, you know, and sometimes it takes a while, you know, for a whisper to get through, but you learn how to listen to those things and act on them and move forward and just see what happens. And it's a process of discovery and curiosity, really. And those are very rewarding ways to work. I think those serve me well in the sense that they reward me. And I like that. I like the reward of making things. And, it's a very different kind of reward than having an exhibition later, you know. But I think it's a very valuable place for me to remember I need to be, you know, to be rewarded by the process of discovery and curiosity.
Well, what you brought up about glaze is especially interesting to me because, like you said, it's not just a buildup of clay, it's the actual topography that you're creating through the use of glaze. And sometimes it's almost as though the cylindrical form starts to recede just a little bit because the buildup is so intense and dramatic. Of course, the other way in which you use glaze is for color. And of course, the black isn't necessarily the most obvious example of that. So I'll go to another work. So I'm wondering if you can talk about color, because it's so vibrant and it's so ebullient, this chromatic range that you're exploring, and yet you are a self-professed chromophobe. So I'm wondering if you can talk more about entering this huge color field that people can now see in these slides.
Well, check this out. This is like, wow, for me. I decided to wear it today. I'm listening up relative to color, but it's true. I mean, I chromophobe in the sense that if you look at the work I made for the first 25 years after grad school, there was something about working with color that was too frivolous. This kind of color at that time was too frivolous for me because I couldn't understand the value of it in relationship to the kinds of things I wanted to make. I was making work that felt really clear to me. I understood why I was making it. I understood what I was trying to make. I just needed to invent it, and the color was very, very reserved and restrained. It had a lot to do with the natural coloration of clay and terra sigillata, the kind of surfaces I was putting on things. And like this piece in the upper, these two pieces, well, 3 of the 4 anyway. And so I could deal with earthen tones. I could deal with blue because blue is like water or like sky, and I could deal with white and sometimes black. But that was it, for a long, long time. And I just shied away from it because I felt like, as I said, it felt too frivolous to me, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand its meaning. And I think color, first of all, is very hard to control in ceramics anyway. And I've never been a painter. I've never been a photographer or anything where I've had to deal with color in another kind of context. I'm also a shy person. I've gotten over a lot of that. Just teaching will take you out of being shy, But I think being shy also had something to do with it early on. I just did not want to draw attention to myself, and so I didn't want to make things that were jubilant, But it doesn't mean I can't enjoy it. I've always been envious of people that can dress freely and colorfully and express themselves with color. I think it's a beautiful thing. I just never found a route to it, and so I stayed away from it. But I felt like I had to do it. I just had to get over it, and I think that way because I felt that way because I've always known that the kind of chromatic the kind of chromatic territory that ceramics occupies is very unique and really remarkable. And so how could I not eventually try to find my way into that and find a way to use it significant, in a way that felt significant to me and not frivolous. And so I eventually started to do that, although I didn't do it. I did it with matte colors. I eased into it with matte colors, nothing too shiny. And just started to explore it. And just a lot of times I found that if you work long enough, and I feel like one of the things I'm very proud of is I've always worked. I've never stopped working. Always been making things. I don't know how or why. I just love doing it. I think it goes back to that idea of being rewarded by my work, but I feel like the thing that's happened to me a lot is everyone's got a rule book, you got these rules about how you're supposed to make things. And then every once in a while along the way, I would just slip up and forget I just forget I had these rules, and I do something. And then I just say, wow, here's a new rule book, and so that kind of happened with color too. I just kind of forgot I wasn't supposed to be so restrained and reserved and sparse in the things I was making too, and that I wanted to find a way to celebrate color. So little by little, I am very intuitive about color now, but it's all backed up a little bit by science. I know too much, science. I'm not a scientist, but I know too much about ceramic materials to be naive, But it's very intuitive too. I do things just intuitively, and I'm kind of subversive. I'll take things that are known to me or commercially available, and I'll just subvert them by adding things that feel interesting, or that it's just a material that I like. I like bone ash, I like kaolin, I like things. And so, and I can't explain it. I like soda ash. So I'll just add them just to see what'll happen. And I'm always up for that. And these happen to be a series of tests that I've done recently to become even more vibrant with my color palette. I don't know that I'll use them I don't know that I'll use these, but I like making them, and I'm going to try to find a way to use them. But I don't really take notes. You know, I have to. I don't want to. I don't want to be a scientist, reproducible. I want to be a chemist who finds things and counts on intuition and guesswork and a little bit of luck. And I want to bring those kind of powers to it. I think they're more powerful than being a lab coat scientist with reproducible results. And that's just me. I know people that are very, they're great chemists with ceramics, and they treat it like a science, and they do wonderfully well. It just doesn't seem to be the way my brain works.
I think Via Salomon said something like color is promiscuous and self-obsessed and only talks about itself. And that's always stayed with me. I've always loved that. But you brought up so many points just now, and one is this attachment or commitment to risk and to exploration. And there's such an interesting balance that you have always struck between, like you've said, subverting your virtuosity or knowledge that you have in order to remain open to what else might be possible, to what the possibilities are. And color seems to be such a rich field for you to do that, especially since you, in your prior work, hadn't worked as much with color as you do now. And so there's still a lot of territory to explore. So I'm wondering if you can talk more about how you use risk, your relationship to risk and unpredictability, and why that is so important to your practice, in part because there also is the dual commitment that you have to pottery. And you have said before that pottery is at the core of what you do, and that your work is about reactivating pottery. So it seems like there are these dual strands of maintaining some conversation with tradition at the same time that you are trying to break all the rules, both any rules that are in place for yourself and rules that might be in place for the field historically.
You know, as you're asking all these questions, my mind is racing. Now I have to catch up to my thoughts. First of all, the field of the history of pottery is pan-cultural, almost every that we know of, historically otherwise, has created pottery. And if there was clay, I think the Hawaiian Islands are too geologically new to get clay, so maybe there's not pottery there, but everyone else has done it, and they've all done it so uniquely. It's such a rich, deep history there. I still see things I'm blown away by that I had no idea existed, and it feels so enormous to me. The history of ceramics is so enormous that I'll never mind it. And I think that just that thought alone opens me up in a lot of ways. And the technical possibilities, there are so many things that I'll never get to, I'll never try, I'll never know, just all the different ways in which clay has been exercised and worked through to create things all over the world for 7,000 or 8,000 years. It's so vast, all of it. It doesn't operate in a small box. And so I think that those couple thoughts right there, the technical, kind of the technical vagaries that are available to me, and then the history of pottery and ceramics to mine, it just makes me feel like I'm in an ocean full of ideas. So I think that helps me a lot. So the one thing that is a constant in my work is the idea that the ceramic vessel is present, and sometimes I really try to evade associations with cultural prototypes. I don't want anyone to look at my work and say, oh, that's derivative of Greek culture, or oh, that's derivative of Japanese culture, pottery culture. And that's not an easy thing to do. You know, so much great stuff's been made. And so I try to find a way to slip through the cracks of history with the things I make. I think it's important. I don't want it to be pinned down by association to a cultural prototype. Although I admire so many things, you know, out there in the history of ceramics. And I just feel like the vessel is so important. The ceramic vessel, if you understand it, as like iconically important to so many cultures in the development of civilization, and as a human expression, a kind of a global kind of human expression that's been invented in similar ways in many different places, even simultaneously, and practiced by all humans, kind of. There's just something about it that's so base and so interesting and so important that I can't comprehend it. And I think working is a way to deal with that thing that I can't. It's an itch I can't fully scratch, you know. So I feel like there's just endless material for me there. The risk part, you know, the variables are all in the things that I do. And let me just add that I'm not a potter. You know, I don't want to be a potter. I don't identify with making pottery. I really love pottery. I understand pottery. I've made a lot of it, and I love potters and all that. But in my spirit, I'm not a potter. So I'm trying to find meaningful ways to deal with. I don't really want to call them pottery, but they're vessel shapes. You know, they're archetypal vessel shapes that I've always worked with, and I try to make my own kind of meaning out of that without making pottery, you know, without referring to cultural prototypes. The risk issue has to do, maybe has a lot to do with the fact that I'm a teacher, and I'm in a system, I'm in a university system that values growth. It's not, what we're doing is not about maintaining traditions. It's not about teaching people proper craft protocols and how to carry forward a tradition. You know, we're not a guild. We're not a craft school per se. You know, it's an art school, and so the idea is to kind of push the envelope, push the needle forward. And I think that, so I've just spent so much time encouraging people to engage. It's the joy of learning how to engage risk, you know, because of those things that have to do with discovery, as I was saying, and curiosity, just being curious about things. And so I think that it's something I've professed to students, and, you know, forever, and the artists that we work with forever. And it's just part of me. It's something I enjoy. And I feel like I've been given that, it's a gift, really, that I've been given by being in a system that supports me. And so I don't, you know, I don't have to take my wares to market every week to eat food. You know, I can be experimental. And, you know, I think I have to remind myself, being experimental means you don't really know what's going to happen. If you know what's going to happen, maybe it's not so experimental. But so I think all those things together, just my nature, and my fascination with the history of pottery, my inclination to understand risk is valuable and rewarding, and the vast pool, the vast ocean of information that I've stuck around in, it all feels very stimulating to me.
Well, you brought up the university setting, so I was wondering if we can pivot to that in a second, but I just took a look at my notes, and there's one thing I wanted to bring up, connecting back to an earlier part of our conversation about color, and that's one of the formative experiences that you had as a child. I thought it would be really interesting for people who don't know about this to hear about your neighbors, where you grew up, and the Westons, and how that, you know, your experience with that black and white photography whenever you went over to their home was formative for you.
I missed the first part of that, but I got the second part, maybe, about the Westons and where I grew up.
Yeah, I just thought it would be a really interesting story for people to hear, for those who don't know about it, and how that was formative for you, and this trajectory of your chromatic palette that has revealed itself over time.
Yeah, well, you know, so I was born in 1954, whatever that might mean to anybody. you know, but what it means is the epoch within which you grow up has a lot to do with everything, of course. And so, I mean, I was still watching black and white movies, and, black and white TV, maybe for a while, yeah. But when I was 10, my family moved from New York to Big Sur, you know, which was revelatory for me, and as a 10-year-old. And it just, you know, we moved to Big Sur, and it changed our world. And it just so happened that my next door neighbor, just down the dirt road, you know, went from Broadway in New York City to dirt road in Big Sur, and waterfalls behind the house. And it just so happened my next door neighbor was the Weston family, and Edward Weston's youngest son, Cole, and his kids were my age. So Edward Weston's grandkids, and Edward Weston had died by then, but he died in the 50s. But everything was still there. His dark room and his, you know, the house he lived in, and a lot of his photography. And it was before his photography really took off. That took off later, as photography took off later. But that was some of the first art I had seen, you know, out of the context of a museum. I remember seeing in particular one image that was in their house, in Cole Weston's house, on the wall, and I looked at it. I walked up to it, I looked at it, and I thought, oh my God, how did they? It's a sheet draped over a piano. And then I looked again, and I realized it was a wilted cabbage leaf, you know. And I remember as a 10-year-old, it really affected me. I thought, wow, that image changed my vision. It made me see things that weren't there. And you know, I cognate that the way I now, based on what I know about art. But I thought it was just very interesting, and it arrested my attention as a 10-year-old. And it was about transforming, you know, transforming my vision, you know, and how I saw things. And I always appreciated that. And I of course saw a lot more Western photography in black and white in particular. That's all I did. And I felt like the black and white films and black and white photography to this day for me are extremely stimulating. They're very powerful. They're very evocative and moody, and they're stripped of color, so they don't distract. They kind of drive a wedge into the point, you know. And so I've always, from a very early point in my life, appreciated and been drawn to, you know, things that are very, very simple and that don't bear color per se necessarily.
And then several years later, you took your first ceramics class, didn't you, in high school?
Yeah. Yes. There's somewhere in there. There's a vessel somewhere, a little pot, little piece of pottery, and I had a very there it is. That's the first pot I ever made, and I keep it with me. It's in my studio. It's the only real piece of ceramics I've ever kept of mine. Everything else is gone. And I wanted nothing more. I was a very bad student. I'll admit it to everyone in the audience. I flunked high school. How about that? I was such a bad student. I was bad because all I wanted to do was play baseball, and that's all I did. I just played baseball. I wanted to be really good at it, and I was down at the field practicing every day, and I had the key to the batting cage, and I didn't go to class, and I flunked. And so, of course, I was humiliated by that later. I became a good student in college, you know. But I had a total identification as a younger person with the idea of playing baseball. I really loved it. It was very profoundly mysterious, very hard, and full of failure. I mean, you're only in baseball can you fail 7 out of 10 times as a hitter and still be a genius. You know, nothing else in life will allow that. And I was told by a counselor, he called me a problem child and said, problem children like you go down, we send you to the pottery and you can hang out with Lloyd Baskerville, the teacher down there, he'll straighten you out. And so I was signed up. It wasn't my idea. I was signed up for a pottery class. And I walked into that studio, and in the way I just say it is I never walked out. I fell absolutely in love with the mysteries of working with clay, and I struggled mightily with it, and took me a long time to learn how to throw in the wheel and everything. And this was the first pot I made. I remember very clearly in 1972, the day I took that out of the kiln. He handed it to me warm, and I held it in my hands, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe I'd made it, and how beautiful I thought it was, and how interesting. And I felt completely, I was under the spell. And so really, since 1972, well, 1971 maybe, from that day forward, I've been in the studio most days in my life, except when I'm traveling or something. Otherwise, it's my natural home, and it started something. This little pot started something. So I keep it with me in the studio. I like to look at it once in a while and hold it. It reminds me.
So
Signed.
it's what?
I signed it. I don't really sign my work, but I signed that. I dated it and signed it. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure people had a chance to see this too, because while we're on the topic of your earliest years doing ceramics, because you also told me that when you were in high school, your teacher took you in your class to dig clay directly out of the ground, and now you are doing it again in your own backyard.
Yeah. I could tell you some wild stories about that teacher. We don't have, but he was brilliant. He was a brilliant, strange character who taught me a lot about teaching. And because I'll say one more thing about him. I was sent down there in the spring semester of my last year in high school. Too late to rescue me for graduation, but he sent, and so I only had one semester with him per se, but he invited me to teach with him that summer for some reason, to teach a summer session with him. And I didn't know anything. And I was really moved by that. And so really from that moment on, from the summer right after my senior year in high school, to this day, I've had this dual kind of charge in life to both teach and make. And I've found a way to kind of balance and juggle those things, since that day. And I've always identified with teaching and identified myself, maybe more strongly as a teacher than as a maker. I'm trying to change that now. And so he did a lot of things that were really interesting, like that. And he took us out and showed us where to dig clay and how to process it, how to make things simply by hand with no tools, and then how to go find cow dung that was right, and for firing. And then we would go all together early in the morning, dig a pit, and without bisking anything, for people that work with clay, and we would pit fire the work. And what a way for a high school kid to learn about ceramics. It wasn't about buying highly refined materials that have been gathered from all over the world and processed and designed. And you went out and identified clay that was workable and processed it, and then made the things you wanted to make, and then went out and got the fuel and fired them. And so there were some great lessons that he taught like that and more. And so I've been very, very appreciative of the things he kind of started in me as a teacher, and the lessons that he taught me as a teacher. He taught me how to listen more. It was the act of listening, actually really listening when someone's talking to you, instead of just talking over them with all your knowledge, but to actually listen. And that way you could tune into somebody and help them in ways that were personal to them. So the fact that he saw something in me or needed some, I don't know what he did, but he wanted me there for the summer. And so he started a fire in me as a teacher and as a maker. And I was surrounded by really interesting people in that class too. And so many kids, as I was mentioning to you the other day, went on from that class to become makers, and writers, and singers, songwriters, and authors, painters who went to Yale and taught at Chicago Art Institute, and glass blowers, and two glass blowers, and other people that work with clay. And so he understood how to turn people on and light them up and find the best in them. And we all loved him and appreciated him. And anyway, so this is clay from my backyard, and it's a funny relationship I have. You know, it's amazing clay in San Pedro, California, and it's really good clay for making stuff. It's really bad for growing stuff. And so I grow plants too, and I had to plant all my plants in this clay, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's going to kill all my plants. You know, I've got rare, ancient, really fascinating plants that are endangered species, and you know, all that. And I've been taking care of them for 30 years, some of them 25 years. And so I had to plant them all in this stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, I love this clay and I hate it. You know, I put all my plants at risk, but there's no choice. You know, so but they're doing fine. It's really mineral rich and organic, and you know, anyway, there's just nothing more satisfying than to go dig your own clay and just stick your hands in it, you know, like that.
So fast forwarding a few decades from high school to the late 80s, you start teaching at Long Beach and developing what would eventually become the CCC. I'm wondering if before we start talking about the CCC, you can give folks here who haven't visited before a sense of what they see and experience when they arrive. So both in terms of the equipment, the physical resources, also the cultural environment, the conversations happening between artists, students, technicians, etc.
At Long Beach, yeah. Well, you know, I taught for 34 years, and I was lucky to teach with colleagues that knew how to get things done, you know, more so than me in many ways. And I teach right now with a brilliant colleague, Christopher Miles. And so over the years, we've just had wonderful opportunities to expand our outdoor space. It was kind of started by Tom Ferreira, you know, someone that taught there, you know, before any of us. And to capture outdoor space in Southern California meant that we could get all the equipment. We had a big renovation. We got all of our equipment out of the building. And when I got there, all the equipment was in the building, and there was hardly any outdoor space. And we were able to build a kiln yard. And that started something, because once we got all the equipment out of the building, it freed up all this space. We had kilns and clay mixers and dry material storage, all the stuff in the building. It was terrible. The studios were small. But once all the equipment was out, we opened up all this floor space. We were able to build a gallery. When I was there as a part-time teacher, we had a small room that was filled. It had one kiln in it. It was a big car kiln that was there from when I was a student. I tore it down. They let me tear it down because it wasn't functional. And we built a little gallery in the building. And that was transformative for our students. They were able to actually, you know, make an installation, or they could do whatever they wanted in there, or install a body of work instead of having a little pot on a tabletop and, you know, on a napkin and a pile of sand, you know, and have a critique. They had to make whole bodies of work. And in the renovation, that gallery was so transformative for the program that we built another gallery. It's even bigger, you know. And anyway, that kiln yard outside, which got expanded a couple times, has allowed us to work outdoors a lot, because Southern California weather permits it. And there's so many schools, so many industries that, you know, they come and go, but their equipment stays, and then they want to get rid of it. And we've gone out and brought in so much equipment, you know, that, and, you know, I've had colleagues, Chris Miles in particular is really great at wrangling money from the university, much better than I ever was. And so he's also done a lot to really populate our facility with equipment. Great. You know, we have like 30, we don't even know how to count. It's between 30 and 40 kilns in Long Beach State of all kinds, both gas and electric. And a lot of them are outdoors. And so that really was a big game changer. So when you come to visit us, you can go indoors. It's kind of a rabbit warren of rooms and studios, and they're private and public and shared, and storage and things like that. And then outdoors, we can work outdoors sometimes, but we also have all of our kilns. And when things are going well, I mean, pre-pandemic, right? We would have sometimes I always wanted to hire part-time teachers that were going to work, and I made sure they had space. I wanted them to work. I wanted them to be an artistic voice, not just an academic voice. So we could have 5 part-time teachers, 2 full-time teachers, all working in the building. We might have 2 or 3 grad students. We might have 25 undergrads. And then you might have 4 or 5 or 6, or, whatever it is, visiting artists all working. And so the place, literally hums, and you have this discourse that goes on. A lot of it's just organic, and it's the way that I thought education should be. I thought a lot of things should be organic, not just academic. And our curriculum is really well thought out and designed to offer a lot of different experiences, well designed, well thought out, and it works pretty well, but I was never confident that was enough. And I felt like students needed to travel, and so we started an international travel program that sent well over 300 kids all over the world, over 20 countries, and during the summers in particular. And then I thought students needed to be around artists more than anything. And I was never, when I went to school, all my teachers, I had 2 teachers, I've had 14 different teachers, but the place where I earned my undergraduate degree at Long Beach State, 2 of them had doctorate degrees. They were very academic, and I didn't like it. I wanted to be around makers, and when I went to Japan, I was around someone that actually didn't want to talk about what he did, but he was brilliant at doing what he did. And that I thought was so interesting, to just watch a brilliant person make, and then if you ask him a question, you might answer, but that was so instructive and set a bar, that for someone like me who's a physical learner, was very important. And so I just thought to have lots of different voices in the building. I thought the diversity of voice was very important, and I'm partially because I'm shy, and I just don't see myself this way, but I've never thought that my way was the way. There have been a lot of teacher models that can pull that off in a university, and basically the way they make things is the way that everyone learns, But I've never been confident that I could do that or should do that. So I've always thought that I wanted to put a lot of different stuff on the table. I wanted to load that table up. I wanted to overload it, really. And then it was the job of each student to try to decide what was valuable, what to gravitate towards, what to move away from. And in that way, between international travel and all the things we could expose our great kids to, and all the different, just a flow of artists coming through who were either giving a lecture about their work or actually working in-house and producing work with the help of students. And our wonderful revolving part-time crew that would come and teach us, and the full-time teachers. I felt like all of that, I was very interested in all that. It was a giant chessboard, for me. And I felt like that was the way I wanted to teach. I wanted to use the instruments of the university and all these different facets that felt good, healthy, and vibrant. And it was by using those mechanisms that I was teaching, much more so than I was interested in walking into a classroom and teaching someone how to make a pinch pot. That did not interest me as much as using the tools that were at our disposal to teach kind of holistically. I thought that was really interesting to me. And so that was a wonderful time, for a long time. And
I think that's one of the really fascinating things for me, especially as someone who works in larger museums, and certainly not to the scale of Long Beach State or the Cal State system. But you're constantly presented with a question or problem, and you see this vast structure in front of you, and you have to figure out how to navigate that structure, or you have to figure out how to construct a structure if one doesn't already exist. And so how you and Chris Miles and other people who've been involved over the years have been able to construct that, navigate it, has been really fascinating for me to think about, because it's really been a long-term effort over decades. And one question I have for you that you already began to address, but I would love to hear more about, is what acute and long-term needs you saw this program that developed into the CCC addressing. So not just for undergrads, but for the field of ceramics as it pertained to California and also at large.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. You know, I don't think that I've hardly ever gone into anything knowing exactly what I wanted to accomplish, you know, or I feel like one of the most wonderful things about, you know, going into your own work or teaching, however that works. And let me just say that I think you have to have a little bit of outlaw in you, because if you play by the rules of the institution, so you have to be willing to break a few rules here and there. And I think I'm constantly dragging Chris Miles into stuff that, you know, we haven't gotten caught yet, but that's come pretty close, you know. But anyway, you know, so there's a lot of unintended consequences that pop up that when you start doing things, and if you pay attention to those, you can start to understand the value of something that you didn't quite see when you started, and then you can capitalize on it. You know, you can really start to build into it and lean into it, you know. And so I've known about the history of West Coast ceramics. You know, I think that, you know, the revolutions that took place in ceramics in America and that reverberated around the world too, did not happen at Alfred or on the East Coast. They happened on the West Coast. They happened in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they happened in Los Angeles. And so there's a wonderful, rich kind of maverick history of that out here. And I've always liked trying to, you know, join the lineage of that somehow. I've been proud that the West Coast is where all the nuts roll downhill and stop, you know. And it was just such interesting people, especially in the Bay Area. You know, I think, you know, Volkus started down here in Southern California with his crew of people, you know. But what the really interesting stuff I think has happened up in the San Francisco Bay Area, a place that's actually so kind of geographically tight. So many interesting people up there, my God. And so I've just felt like that. First of all, ceramics has struggled. I've been I've felt the oppression of the field of ceramics for a long time. I could feel it, and I couldn't even identify it, you know. And so that's another thing. It's just like, that's another argument for me. I have not liked the position we've been in, and the position that we've kind of claimed for ourselves in high craft, you know. And I've so admired people like Ron Nagel, who's a friend of mine, and Ken Price before him, you know, and who have found ways and, you know, found a way to find that bridge to get off the island and to walk out into the pastures of contemporary fine art, you know. And that's been a very, very complicated thing to do, moving back in time, less and less complicated, more and more easily accessed now. And it's one of the most brilliant things that I've seen happen in ceramics in my lifetime. And it's really accelerated in about the last 10 years, you know. So, you know, kind of broadly speaking, the entrance, the acceptance and the open arms of the world of contemporary fine art, for a lot of different reasons, of ceramics, has been a very, very interesting and kind of energizing signal, you know. And so I've been really interested in trying to help that along, help accelerate that process. And I'd say for about the last 10 years, we call it the CCC now, you know, the Center for Contemporary Ceramics. That's something that, you know, my colleague Chris Miles came to me in like 2016 or something. And, you know, he said, I've got this idea, and, you know, this thing you do, we should really institutionalize it, because it's run by a personality, my personality, and eventually I'll be done, and then it'll have to be taken over, and if it's institutionalized, it'll be protected, and we raise money for it and all that, and so I thought that was basically a good idea, you know, and then Chris did all the hard work of naming it and writing up all the, you know, just volumes of paperwork that he did, and then kind of spirited it through. The university got it signed off without a hitch. You know, he did it very well. And so that kind of gave it an identity, you know, since about 2017. And right about the time I was on Instagram too, and I could say, you know, this is what it's called, this is what it is, this is who comes here, you know. And I think that really helped it quite a bit and helped it grow up. Mature. But I'd say from about 2000, what happened was Kristen Morgan, who you may or may not know, taught with us. And she was like an early, you know, someone I brought to school to work, just to work. And she ended up teaching with us. And then she retired in 2007 or 8, right in a trough, the economic trough we were in. And I was petrified. I felt like Kristen really helped put us on the map, you know, but because of her work was so powerful, and people were starting to look at it differently than ceramics, because it wasn't fired and it was just art, you know. And I felt like she was getting us a certain kind of notice and attention, the level of which we really hadn't received before, that was outside the field. And I really valued that. I thought that was really what we needed, and I was just petrified that we would sink like a rock when she left. And so what I did was I just accelerated the idea of bringing artists to campus. And I was teaching by myself, you know, and I couldn't hire anyone because of an economic freeze. And so I let the grads graduate out, and I just turned over all the studios to artists. And I was very interested, first of all, in working with Los Angeles area artists, because I just had this little announcement in my brain. I said, any serious mature artist that wants to work with clay, bring them here. I don't care if they have any experience with it. We'll work with them. And by doing that, we will help raise the tide for ceramics in Southern California. And the value of that was that, in my brain, was in my mind, was that it made Los Angeles, you know, kind of more, it was going to make Los Angeles more interesting for ceramics. And I wanted to work with artists, so I brought a lot of painters in. And my inclination was to work with painters anyway. I brought painters in the 80s even, you know. Gary Amerigan was a dear friend and a very powerful artist who I admired. I was able to bring him in 1985 just to work with clay. And then we, you know, he already knew how to work with clay a bit, but we helped him, and he was kind of an early kind of announcement of that, you know. But I became less and less interested in bringing people that were educated in the field of ceramics. I felt like I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to bring people fresh out of grad school very much at all. And I wanted to bring mature artists, because I felt like I knew what, you know, the kind of indoctrination that people got in grad school for ceramics. I kind of knew the things they'd say. I knew the work they'd make. I felt it was too predictable, and I didn't like it. And I was probably wrong about that, but that's what I thought. And I liked artists because I had no idea what they're going to do. They kind of broke all the rules that, you know, I grew up with in the field of ceramics and polite craft culture and all that. And it was they were disruptors, you know. And the more I saw that, the more I thought, this is valuable. However complicated it is, or, you know, hard for us to put up with. And there were moments there where I think I upset a lot of people by bringing in too many people, or bringing in too many disruptive people. And I know I upset students and probably my colleagues too, you know. But I was willing to take that risk and stay with it and keep disrupting and try to change the culture for ceramics in our building and for students, so that it didn't abide by that history of polite craft culture that pottery is made by, but art should not be made by, I think, especially with clay. So that was just me playing hunches and following my intuition and unintended consequences, and just wanting to change the dynamic in Southern California, and also for our students. You know, I felt like that was really important. That was our home base, and we've been lucky. We've had so many really wonderful kids come through State College, and I've always, in my heart, wanted to give them more than they paid for, more than they expected. So it was about, juggling all those raw eggs between international travel and the adventures that we, got ourselves into, Chris and I and others, with that, and then at home with an expanded. Another interesting thing about school was that it's Southern California, and when I was a student there, we had gas kilns, and we had raku kilns, and we had salt kiln and soda kiln and all that stuff. And when I got there, I just thought, we can't do that anymore. It's the air quality. When I got there as a teacher, I got rid of the salt and the soda, the raku, and all those things that were just too pollution heavy. And so we don't, like a lot of schools have all those kilns, and they're atmospheric kilns, and they're very romantic. I think that's a problem that I have, especially after being in Japan for 3 years. I think they're overly romantic, and I don't like relying on them for results. And so, we got rid of them. And so what we have are big kilns, and we have a lot of color, and I feel like students were forced to confront scale. And I don't mean they had to make big things. I just meant that they could if they wanted to, or they had to decide if they didn't want to, and work and find an appropriate scale. We didn't scale their work for them by saying you can only work this big because our kilns are only so big. They could make anything they want and dream up any scheme they wanted to dream up, and then try to find a way to make it. And I think coming into that building, whether you were an artist or a student, basically, I wanted to incite you. I wanted to incite, even all the great artists we've had, I wanted to incite them in the building to try things that that they could only dream about. And somehow, hopefully, we would then help them do that, And it got us into a lot of trouble. It was great problem solving trouble. But a lot of wisdom, a lot of craft wisdom in that building, with so many smart people, students. I mean, I've had students so much smarter than me about a lot of things, and so and faculty too. I mean, Chris Miles is a great problem solver. He's almost an engineer, and so I'm quick to go to people, students or faculty, to help solve problems, and so we work communally like that. It's the sense of community in the building when everything's pre-pandemic. We'll get back to it, but the sense of community is really great there. It's a very important thing that it's been protected and nurtured and grown. And I really love being there in that way. Sorry, I just keep talking. You have to cut me off.
Oh, well, I was about to say, I was wondering if anyone has any questions. I don't see any in the chat so far. So if anyone has questions, feel free to type those in. And while we wait for questions, I see a comment here. Tony, I don't know if this is visible on your screen, but someone wrote, "I love this very personal relationship with clay, thinking of young art students." And someone else wrote, "This is so wonderful because it gets at the roots of why people make art." And that brings to mind for me an earlier experience that you had that informed what the CCC is now, and that is, you mentioned to me when you were younger and visited UC Davis late at night, and wondering if you can share that story.
Yeah, I was a student. I've just gone to community college, to try to get my GED or whatever they call that thing, and reclaim my dignity, my academic dignity. And I had a friend who was ahead of me, and he was at UC Davis as a student, and I would go up there to visit him. I go to Chico State because I had a friend there, and I went to UC Davis to visit my friend there, and just around California. And I was also thinking, well, where am I going to go after it took me 3 years in the community college. When I'm done, I'm going to go somewhere. I ended up going to Long Beach, but I visit my friends, and my friend at UC Davis, I visited him twice, and it was always at night, and 2 different trips that I remember, and it was always at night, and that's when things were humming, in TV9. I remember seeing Bob Arneson working in a studio. Of course, I was so intimidated. I knew who he was, and you could just feel all this energy, and I knew, Ceramics Monthly or magazine. I knew about Bob Robertson and his work to some degree, but he was there working late at night, and the whole place was loaded with people, and it was very, very. You're talking about 1975 or something, I don't know, and it was very chaotic. But it was creative chaos, not just neglectful chaos. And so there was something about that that gave me a lot of energy. I'm kind of conservative. I didn't want to go to school there. I wanted to go to school at Long Beach, which was much more conservative, really. But it didn't mean that I didn't think it was just loaded with it. It scared me, probably. It was too open. It was too wide open for me at that time. It just scared me. But I remember seeing meeting Tom Rippon, being introduced to him, and then later was told that he wasn't even a student there. And he was living in some plywood box that he built. I think he built it up in the rafters or up on a second deck somewhere, and he'd sleep in that and work all day. And he wasn't a student, but he was working there as an artist. And I just thought it was amazing. I kind of grew up with bohemian parents and hippies and all that kind of stuff. And so that, it made sense to me, and I kind of liked the renegade part of it, and the fact that the way in which they inhabited that building, and it just stuck with me forever. And I've thought about it a lot, and I've also been to the European Ceramic Work Center, and I'd just say that's another model, two educational models, as well as my high school, and Lloyd Baskerville. The European Ceramic Work Center is a place where artists would come make stuff. The idea of artists coming to ceramics programs is not new. Syracuse did it beautifully, and in the 70s also brought in a lot of artists to work. And I found all those things really interesting, really energizing. And especially at the European Ceramic Work Center, I thought things were being made there that were just off the planet, for being avant-garde with clay. It's a hard word to use, avant-garde, and, because it's hard to be avant-garde, but I felt like I saw it there, in the European Ceramic Work Center, and in how it operated in its early days. It's no longer that for me, but the director, Xavier Tobas, is a Spaniard who came to the States, and I brought him to school and became good friends with him a couple of times. I wanted to hear him talk, and I wanted to divine into his thinking about how an institution should be run. And I learned a lot of really valuable things from him, just little things sometimes, but they felt monumental. For instance, one to me was when an artist comes to you and asks you to do something, or they announce that they want to try to do something, never say no. Just don't say no. And erase that from your vocabulary. When I talk to students about assisting artists, I say, don't say no. Let's figure it out if they want to do something. And I say that because craft culture, there's so many do's and don'ts. You can't do this, you can't do that, it won't work, and that's all pottery, pottery-based stuff that, how do you get reproducible results to market and make it work? And it's by saying no to a lot of stuff, and compromising and finding the path through that will get you there. But that's not art for me. And so, all those different models kind of affected me in different ways. And I think had a lot to do with help me guide my thinking along the way,
We have a question. What do you think about the importance of mentorship for young artists, and how does this work in the area of diversity, non-white students? How can we expand the universe of people coming to art as students?
Yeah, I think well, for one thing, we have an extremely diverse student population, increasingly diverse student population, and I'm not sure. For me, it's the way I grew up. It's the way I was raised. But I'm most attracted to talent. I'm very, very attracted to talented people. And I want to help talented people. I think artists need help and deserve help. And so the way it seems to have worked is that I would say the vast majority of the people that have come to the center, certainly disproportionate, you know, with the population at large, and university population, or local population, or national population, or anything, have been women and have been artists of color. You know, it's just been a really splendid bouquet of people, and that's just the way it worked, you know, because I was interested in talented people, and that's where I found the talent. So I gravitated towards talent, and I also have known that there are certain ways in which artists of color can model behavior, understand things, describe things, import and export knowledge to students who don't look like me, you know, and that's valuable too. And so I've always been very interested in having a diverse array of voices in the building. And we just had, and I think also, you know, one thing is that, and I don't know what the future holds, you know, but the CCC to date has stayed out of the pocketbooks of artists or the wallets of artists. We don't charge anything for space or for firing. Go try to find a space, and then go try to have someone fire your work and see what it does to your bank account. And I just felt like, first of all, we have all kinds of people come to the center. Some people have money, but a lot don't. And so to stay out of their money was a very important thing. And in line with that, to open doors to the institution, open access to the institution, and just invite people in, you know, to come. And much like Tom Rippon was invited into Davis, you know, to work, because he, you know, maybe they can't afford to be a student, or their time has passed to be a student, but the university offers so much. And I felt like opening the doors of the institution to all kinds of people was very important. And increasingly that seemed to pay off with our students as we've experienced an increasingly diverse, you know, student population. So just wonderfully so. And so I like the way it's been configured to date, actually, and been for a long time.